Mr. Chair.
Denise Roche.
Mr. Chair, it's my pleasure to take a call on part 2 of the Employment Standards Bill. I have no doubt that the Minister, when he first mooted this bill, was absolutely genuine in wanting to address the whole issue of zero-hour contracts and the other areas of employment where workers were being exploited. And other people have spoken about them. Other things like where garage attendants were having to pay when people had run off with the petrol without paying, and it had come out of their wages. All those sorts of issues were indicative of a industrial relations environment where the power was skewed towards the employer, where the protections that had been built up over generations through the union movement have basically been eroded. And we know, sir, that the employment relationship is not an equal relationship, and this is acknowledged in the Employment Relations Act itself. So I believe the Minister, in his absolute genuine attempts to want to address those inequities, and I applaud him for it. I will also, like others in the chamber before me, want to acknowledge those who've worked on this bill, particularly the officials, and particularly the work that you've done in the last week, which must have been at times quite demanding. But I want to particularly acknowledge the union movement. The Unite Union was one of the first unions to take the campaign around zero-hour contracts, and they did this with their members in the fast food sector. It was their work highlighting the impact on everyday working New Zealanders who were guaranteed no hours whatsoever, who had to sit and wait to be contacted by the employer, who could not pay their bills, who could not plan their lives. It was their work in highlighting this, and I might add John Campbell on one of his last shows, showing the public of New Zealand that this kind of bad treatment of employees happened right across New Zealand. And that's what sparked this whole movement towards shifting, I believe, shifting this government to a situation where it decided that it absolutely had to take some action to address what is essentially incredibly unfair action from employers. So, Sarah, I just want to talk in detail about part 2. In the second reading, when this bill came back to the House, I said that this bill was a different beast to what had been introduced in the first reading, and it was. During the Select Committee, there had been great arguments, some fantastic submissions, particularly like 10,500 written submissions from working people right across New Zealand, good submissions from employers who also said they don't want zero-hour contracts. So during the Select Committee process, we did actually manage to strengthen the clauses in the bill around compensation for shift cancellations, around notice, but actually Ian Lees-Galloway was correct in his statement earlier tonight that when this bill came back to the House, it didn't actually address zero-hour contracts. What it did was enshrine them in the legislation. So it is incredibly heartening to see and to hear the Minister say tonight that he will support the supplementary order papers from Ian Lees-Galloway that do actually put in place a guarantee of minimum hours. And it goes hand in hand with the other provisions in the bill around notice, compensation and proportionality. That is the number of guaranteed hours versus the number of hours that a person may have to be available. And that, sir, deals with the whole issue of exclusivity. The whole situation where a worker, an ordinary working person, may have no guarantee of hours, but may also be prevented from finding alternative work. which leads to all sorts of difficulties, as you can well imagine. So, sir, the commitment to a minimum, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the commitment to guaranteed minimum hours is a major step forward, and it is the crux of destroying any attempt to legalise zero-hour contracts. Sir, I also want to address some of the issues that are in the SOPs, and particularly in the one that I'm putting forward. One of the issues that did concern me was around the availability of hours for workers on salaries. And I was concerned about this during the select committee process as well. And that is that salaried workers, within the bill as it came through to the Committee of the Whole House, salaried workers would have been able to have been on call and not compensated for it for a specific or for its non-specified number of hours and not receive compensation within their whole salary payment. And sir, I don't think that's actually reasonable, because it puts them into a situation where they could be working many hours beyond what they had signed up to do. And we've seen exploitation of salaried workers time and time again in the hospitality sector in particular, where I think it was Masala restaurant, where Masala employed a whole bunch of migrant workers on salaries. They were working 70 to 80 hours a week, and they were on call for extra hours, and actually the hourly rate turned out to be around about $2 an hour. And this was for a whole pile of workers who worked there, sir. So I was concerned about the whole protection for salaried workers, which is why I've also put up an SOP in this part, and I think in the next part as well, sir. I think we have to recognise that the industrial relations scene has shifted significantly since this national government has been in power. And we have seen more and more cases, and every MP on this side of the House at least will be able to give you examples of ordinary working New Zealanders who have been exploited at work, who have not been able to pay their bills because they've had illegal deductions from their wages, or they've had no guarantee of hours, who have been told by income support that the job offered to them, despite having no guarantee of hours, was in fact a job, which took them off their numbers, and so made their statistics look a lot better. I think, sir, we have to recognise that in this business, in this House, our duty is to provide laws that are for our most vulnerable. And that is what industrial relations law is about. There is already flexibility within lots of legislation around industrial relations, which enables things like casual workers, permanent part-time workers, fixed-term workers, as well as your being able to be on call. And we have had that. We've had that throughout our industrial relations systems for decades and decades and decades, and it's been tested in our industrial relations legal framework. The zero-hour contracts that we have seen the rise of over the last 10 years has been because employers felt that they could get away with it. And that, sir, has been led by the government and their attitude to legislation. So I want to thank the Minister for stepping back and stepping up for the most vulnerable here. But we all have to recognise that power is never handed over voluntarily. It is the fact there are thousands and thousands and thousands of New Zealanders who have supported this that has shifted you into the right place, and we thank you for it.